All right, we've made it to the final chapter of Winter Danger by William O. Steele. Thank you so much for joining me in this awesome book. I hope you liked it. And also make sure you leave any title suggestions in the comments. And I'll look forward to our next book we're going to read together. But first, let's read Winter Danger, Chapter 12. Caje began to pull the sled over the snow as fast as he could, but his legs were giving out. He kept glancing back at the big varmints. They were coming closer, silently, steadily. In ordinary times, wolves weren't too brave. They weren't apt to give trouble. But these wolves were starving. The smell of fresh killed bear had them half mad already. They might keep their distance now, but a little more and they might leap at his throat and pull him to the snow. Ahead of him, a canebrake bordered the creek. He saw a sheltered place where the cane grew close and the great thick stalks made a sort of wall. He swerved in that direction, jerking the sled with all his might. He would have to make a fire. That was one sure way to keep the wolves at bay now that darkness was on him. He pulled the sled close to the cane and turned to look back at the wolves. Among the scattered trees he could see them, coming silently closer. With his tomahawk, he quickly cut some stalks of the dried cane. Next, he emptied the powder from his pan into his palm and plugged the touch hole. He placed a piece of tow cloth in the bottom of the pan and the powder over the top of this. He glanced up. The wolves crouched not 5 feet away from him. He could see their fangs gleaming in the dim light. With his rifle close to the pile of cane, he pulled the trigger. The flint struck the frizzle and made a spark in the pan. There was a flash as the powder caught. Quickly he snatched the smoldering tow and thrust it among the dried cane and began to blow gently. The flames caught. He had an uneasy feeling that the wolves were creeping nearer, but he didn't dare turn away from the fire now. He only had 1 charge of powder left. He nursed the fire carefully, adding the dried cane to it a little at a time until it caught well. There was a snarl and a yelp, and one of the wolves leaped at the sled load of meat. Caje jumped up with his tomahawk in his hand. He slashed down on the thick head once, twice, and the wolf lay still. There was a patter of feet on snow as the rest retreated. Behind him he heard the fire snapping and popping. Desperately, Caje looked around. He'd have to have wood. Cane burned too fast. There was a shagbark hickory about 20 feet away. A fallen oak lay beyond it. Carefully he laid his plans. He drew the sled load of meat as close to the fire as he could. He cut a lot of cane and heaped it on the fire. Then Caje grabbed the dead wolf and pulled it along the edge of the break, away from the fallen oak. He backed off and was glad to see the wolves swarm all over the body, tearing at the thick fur. "I reckon I'll be safe till they eat that'n," Caje said, half aloud, as he hurried to the shagbark and stripped off great pieces of the scaling bark. He fed part of this to the fire. Then he went toward the fallen tree. He walked, though he wanted to run. But there was nothing that would set a wolf after you like running, Jared had always told him. So he tried not to hurry, even when one of the beasts turned away from the snarling, yelping pack around the dead wolf and followed him across the snow. Caje turned quickly with raised tomahawk. "I'll bash your head if'n you don't keep a careful distance," he muttered aloud. The wolf drew back a step at the sound of the boy's voice. Caje was quick to see that and shouted, "Now get!" The wolf trotted back to its companions. He made several trips to the fallen tree and got a good lot of wood. As he went, he sang, for the wolves fell back when he raised his voice. He sang bird song about the bluebird nesting in a jaybird's eye, and the one about the old woman who fed her husband marrow bones to make him blind, and one of his mother's sad ones about lovers lost at sea. When at last he had gathered all the wood he wanted and sat down by the fire, he was really warm for the first time that day. After a little while by the fire, his head began to nod. I'll go to sleep sure a settin' here, he thought. He moved further away from the fire. He thought about cutting a piece of the bear meat and roasting it, but he decided against it. Maybe if I stay hungry, it'll keep me awake, he told himself. The wolves had finished the dead wolf now, and some of them came to stare across the firelight at him. He stared back, and by, the gray faces blurred, and he knew he was drifting off to sleep. He moved further from the fire and rubbed snow on his face and hands. Some of the wolves circled toward him, edging closer to him. I'll sing, he said aloud. It'll keep them varmints back a ways, and it'll keep me awake. He sang 1 or 2 songs. He didn't rightly know all the words to them, but he did the best he could. It's a good thing Sam ain't here, he told the wolves. If'n he thinks Bird can't carry a tune, he ought to hear me. The wolves scurried a little further back. I don't know no more songs, strangers, Caje went on good-naturedly. I'll tell you the news from up yonder way. My pappy's done went off and left me, but he give me a good home afore he went. He did the very best he knowed how for me. It just took me a long time to find it out. The night wore on. 2 or 3 times Caje dropped off to sleep and woke to find the fire burned down low and the wolves coming nearer. He gathered more wood, and finally he roasted some meat and ate it, for he didn't think he could get much hungrier and still live. The wolves sat in a half circle watching him. He forced his eyes open and sang his songs through again, though he was dizzy with weariness. He was never going to make it home to save his family. The night would never end. Soon the wolves would get him and the meat, and that would be an end of it. It seemed years longer he sat there. His fire sputtered and sizzled. What ailed it? He got up once more to go for wood. It was raining. For a minute he could hardly believe it. He could only stand there with one hand out like a simpleton, feeling the drizzling rain. It was raining. It had turned warm enough to rain. But the fire! The rain would put the fire out, and the wolves would have him then, sure enough. He looked around frantically, wondering how to save himself. The wolves were gone. The night was nearly over, and the wolves were gone. The rain was too much for the varmints. I can go home now, he told himself aloud. He could follow this creek to the Tadlocks, he was pretty sure. He tightened the knots in his crude traces and set out over the snow. The rain wet him to the skin in no time, and he was half frozen before he'd gone 100 feet. But he didn't mind. It was warm enough to rain. The hard winter was going to end after all. Spring was coming. He and the Tadlocks would live to plow the brown fields, to see the wide yellow blossoms on the poplar trees, to hear the redbirds sing from the wild cherry tree. The sun came up as he reached the foot of the hill. Sam was standing halfway down the hill in the snow, crimson with sunrise. Sam! Caje yelled hoarsely. Sam opened his mouth in astonishment. Mammy! He bawled finally. It's Caje! He's come back! He's brung a heap of meat! He began to run down the hill. His foot slipped and he went sliding down the drifts till he landed at Cage's feet. I can't never get down this danged hill without falling, he said sorrowfully, and then Aunt Jess and Dorcas came running. Caje slept by the hearth all morning. Once in a while he'd wake to hear the household sounds around him, and then he would go off to sleep again. In the afternoon he woke, feeling rested and hungry, but still he lay on his pallet, watching the bright flames leap on the hearth. The cabin was full of the scent of cooking meat. Wasn't it a good thing to have a warm cabin and a fire to come home to? Caje asked himself. Wasn't it fine to have a kettle of meat bubbling for supper, and to have a pallet of quilts to lie on, and an old hound dog sleeping by your side? And wasn't it best to have folks around who were willing to look after you, come what may? Whatever had made him think the Tadlocks hadn't wanted him, Caje wondered. Hadn't every one of them tried to let him know that he was welcome? Only Sam had spoken out against him, and Caje knew now Sam didn't mean what he said. Caje would have to put up with Sam, the way Bird did, and pay no attention to his orneriness. He'd been pretty ornery himself, he reckoned. He thought back over all those weeks he'd spent here and remembered how he'd been so standoffish and bristly, and how patient the Tadlocks had been with him. Well, he'd learned his lesson. This was home, and these folks were his, and never again would he have to sleep in a hollow sycamore. He'd stay here and learn as much about farming as he could. And if the cows didn't like him and he couldn't rive a shingle that right size, the Tadlocks wouldn't care. He sat up and yawned. "He's woke up, Mammy," Sam cried. "Hush, Sam, you'll wake Pappy," ordered Dorcas. "Caje, be you all right? Are you frostbit?" "Nah," Caje answered. "I'm used to sleeping outside." "Here," Aunt Jess poured something into a bowl from a pot over the fire. "Here's some herb tea. You drink it now. It's a good remedy. It's what I give Adam. His fever broke yesterday, and he's resting easy." "We was aiming to kill old Brit today, Caje," said Sam. "I'd a heap rather eat bear than horse." Caje grinned. He knew it was all the thanks he'd get from Sam, but it was enough. He was glad he'd saved Brit. "I'm glad Uncle Adam's better," he told his aunt. "Oh, he'll be up and about soon, now we got meat," Aunt Jess went on. "Yesterday I could have cried when I saw how weak he was. I knew in reason he couldn't get well without meat. But now, well, I reckon you saved all our lives." She smiled at Caje. "Oh, we'd have been all right, I reckon," Sam declared. "I aimed to go out bear hunting this very day. I'd have found a bear." "Drink that tea, Caje," commanded Aunt Jess. "It'll be good for you after you've been out all night this way." Caje began to sip the tea. He didn't feel ailing, but it would please his aunt, and herbs never did anybody any harm, his ma used to say. "We heard them wolves a-howling," Dorcas told him. "We was afeared they had you. Mammy fretted all night. She knew some varmint would get you." Caje flushed. He hadn't meant to worry his aunt. He hadn't really thought she'd know he was gone. "The wolves gave me a little trouble," he answered. "I built a fire and kept 'em off best I could. They was after the fresh meat." "Mammy, listen at Caje. He fought wolves the livelong night to bring us this meat," Dorcas cried. "If'n I'd been there, I'd have shot them wolves," Sam exclaimed. "I wouldn't have built no fire. I'd have slammed one over the head and shot another one and—" He broke off. "How many was there, Caje?" "About 1,000, I reckon," Caje answered seriously. "And I said at the time, I wished Sam was here. He'd know what to do with these here varmints. He'd really lay into 'em." For a minute Sam grinned. Then he scowled. "You sound just like Bird," he blurted finally. "I never thought you'd turn out like Bird, always pestering a body." Caje laughed. "I was just joking," he said. "I'd have been glad to have anybody with me, for a fact. I made sure I'd never get home." "Anyway, Sam, I brung you something," he added. "I brung you the bear toes, and I'll show you how to cook 'em in the ashes, the way me and Pa used to." He and Sam got the bear toes from the lean-to room. Caje knelt by the fire and began to make a bed in the ashes. "Thar now," he told Sam. "They'll be done good by tonight. We can have 'em for supper." "When a body's been out in the woods like you have, I reckon he learns a heap of tricks," Sam said slowly. "He don't learn all of 'em," Caje answered briefly. But he made up his mind to teach Sam what he could. He knew it would please the younger boy. If Sam had a rifle of his own, if he knew a few tricks Bird didn't know and could brag about them, Sam wouldn't be so ornery and hard to put up with, Caje thought. And here was something he, Micajah Amos, could give. He looked around the snug, warm room. Oh, the best part of being home was being able to give something yourself. Uncle Adam woke, and Aunt Jess went over to feed him some broth. After a little, Caje stepped close to the bed, but his uncle was already asleep again. He looked down at his uncle's gaunt, white face for a few minutes. "He's wore out with the fever, but he'll be fine now he's eaten some," Aunt Jess whispered. "Yes'm. Caje answered and turned away. Aunt Jess caught him by the arm. Caje, how come you run off? She asked gently. Caje flushed. I thought there wasn't any need me staying here, just eating all them victuals. I wasn't doing nothing to help. Nothing to help, repeated Aunt Jess. And ever since Adam's been sick, with Bird gone, I've been a-telling myself, ain't it a lucky thing I got a good, steady boy like Caje here with me? Sam's such a hothead. He wouldn't do me no good if anything happened. Ain't it a lucky thing I got Caje? She shook him slightly by the arm. Caje, don't you know sometimes a body don't have to do nothing to be a help? He just has to be there? Yes'm, said Caje. He knew it now, but it took a heap of learning for some bodies. Martha came sidling up to him. She slipped her thin hand in Cage's. Didn't you bring Matilde something? She asked. Ain't you got a pretty for Matilde? For a minute, Caje gazed down into the little girl's blue eyes. Suddenly, he reached inside his shirt and pulled out the rabbit skins Jared had left for him. Here, he said happily, Matilde can have these for coverlids. I won't have no more use for 'em, never again.